I titled my presentation, The Power of Networking. And what I'd like to tell you a little bit about is kind of my journey through Silicon Valley, which is a little bit of a different one than what most have. But also then some of the things that we've been doing with startup companies in New Zealand, several of the programs that we've tried to put together to start to get the network back and forth between Silicon Valley and some of the great technology that's being developed here in New Zealand. So networking and communications, this is what I do. We build high-speed, specialized computers that put packets across the internet. We do security, visibility, we do all sorts of WAN optimization and interesting tricks using these high-speed computers. But really what networking and communication comes down to, from my standpoint as a CEO, is the interconnections between the people, not the computers. And that's been probably the most important part of my career, is figuring out those networks. And that's what we're trying to extend then to the high-tech companies of New Zealand, those connections back to Silicon Valley. So I grew up in Iowa. That's the central part of the United States. Not Central America, but the central part of the United States. It's about as flat as a tabletop and has corn in every direction. In fact, for some of my California friends, I literally walked out on my back porch where I grew up and took a picture north, south, east, and west. And this is exactly what you saw in every direction, all the way to the horizon. So I grew up as a farm kid, and working on the farm, working with livestock, driving tractors, the typical farm stuff. But what was interesting then is as I went to university, I took kind of a typical path. My undergraduate degrees in animal science and microbiology. I was on my way to be a veterinarian, as we already said. But then, as I was getting ready for undergraduate, or after undergraduate, getting ready to go to grad school for veterinary medicine, I had this fundamental problem. I was completely out of money. And they require money for university in the States. So I had to come up with some additional cash. So I'd done a lot of programming for the animal science department. The veterinary professors would always let me do computer programming and things. So I was pretty well versed with all these new PCs that were coming about. And so the local computer store said, why don't you come work for us for a year or two? You can make plenty of money here, more than washing test tubes in the microbiology lab, which was kind of my other alternative. And then when you're done, you go back to school. So I deferred grad school, went off to work in the computer business a bit. That was the year the Macintosh came out from Apple. And that was something that a new guy right out of school could get really excited about. So I latched on to the Macintosh and started selling computers in Ames, Iowa. 20,000 people live in Ames, Iowa. And had pretty good success. In fact, I sold more of those computers than anybody in the United States. And so the interesting bit, there was a sales contest going on, which I literally hadn't paid any attention to. Things like that always go on, but I got a letter from Apple. And the letter from Apple said, we'd like you to come and have dinner with Steve Jobs. Now, I've only been on an airplane once before. I'd never been to California before. And wasn't quite sure what to make of this, except I was incredibly nervous. 22 years old. And so my first trip to California was to have dinner with Steve. Now, when I was getting ready to go, I had a conversation with my father. It was just like, what am I going to do here? What will I possibly do? My hometown's 500 people. I've been working in this little university town, selling computers. Now I'm off to California for the first time. And he said there's one thing that you should always do, and that's MTO. Maximize the opportunity. And he says opportunities will come up in life. Sometimes you'll work hard for them. Sometimes they'll just present themselves. But if you maximize the opportunity each and every time, that's your best chance for success. So I studied and talked to my friends and got everything, because I knew they were going to ask me questions. Like, how do you just sell so many computers? That was going to be the number one question. So I worked hard, developed a lot of answers for what I thought. I even asked other people, what questions do you think they'll ask me? What's Steve Jobs going to ask me at dinner? Those kind of things. And did a good job and really worked hard on it to maximize that opportunity. So, went to have dinner with Steve. Steve also gave me a Porsche, which was kind of nice. So, worked out well. Yeah, I think there was probably 3 people in Iowa that had a Porsche, and certainly none of them that weren't doctors or dentists, years old. So anyway, I had dinner with Steve, had an interesting conversation. Lots of stories to be told about Steve. I'll tell you a little one. So I'm sitting there with Steve, I'm 23, nervous as all get out. And we're having this different conversation about all different subjects. And he says, how many computers did you sell anyway? I don't remember what it was. It's like 150 or something. It wasn't a lot. The Macintosh had no hard drive, no software. I mean, it was pretty weak, right? So I told him, and he just starts ripping on me. That's pathetic. I can't believe that. That's all you sold. Oh my God, you're worthless. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, they're going to kick me out of California now. I'm just going to go home. But I just turned to him and said, Steve, I'm your best guy. And he went, you're right. And we had this great dinner after that. But I was sweating, for sure. So anyway, what could be better? Be a 23-year-old with a Porsche, all this great stuff, except the next call I got about 2 or 3 months later. And in the winters of Iowa, if you think it's cold in Auckland, Iowa can easily get 40 below. And I was out there, and I'd actually had my car. There's a service in Iowa they have where they take your car and you have to have it towed and thawed because the engine compartment had frozen solid. So they had to haul the car in, put it in a heated thing, and I just got my car back. It was like, okay, I got my car thawed, so I'll finally start. This is my other car. The Porsche was actually in the garage, of course. But the other car, I get back, the phone's ringing, I'm sitting down, it's Apple. How about if you come to headquarters and work for us? So now vet school's kind of getting put to the side because, once again, maximize the opportunity. Here's an opportunity that presented itself. Certainly wasn't in my plan, but given the choice and given the opportunity, it seemed like something I needed to give a try. And when I was talking to my friends and my parents and everything else, I said, this is going to last 6 months. There's just no way that I'm going to be able to pull this off and go work at headquarters at Apple with an animal science microbiology degree. Especially when I got to my first building at Apple. This is the first building I worked at Apple. There were more people in the building than in my hometown. So, a little bit nerve-wracking to say the least. But, you know, I thought of it in a way that, you know, there's a lot of people, in fact, there's a lot of Stanford grads, a lot of Harvard grads, you know, throughout. And I said, I could either try to compete with these folks head-to-head or take a different perspective. And so I did that. Sometimes, you know, people would laugh at me when I'd say things like, well, when you feed the cows, you have, and they look at me a little bit funny when I bring up these farm analogies and things, but at the same time, coming from a different perspective, being from the middle part of the country with a different background, oftentimes gave me an angle on problems that other people didn't see. And I tried to use that to my benefit. So I ended up spending 10 years at Apple. Ultimately, I was international general manager for all internet online services and networking for the company. And that's when I first started coming to New Zealand 25 years ago. And so I've met a number of people. Alex Broughton, who was the general manager of the Apple New Zealand office here in Auckland, became a good friend and somebody I still keep in contact all the time. You know, one of those networks that I started to build over time, meeting each of these people, taking their cards, writing them a note when I got back to the office. In fact, when I first had that dinner with Steve, I actually met with a whole series of other vice presidents. And one of the things I did is I took every card from every person I met, and that was pre-email, hand wrote them a note. Say, thank you very much for meeting me, here's my contact information, to build that network. A lot of people think that networking, when it comes to people, is something that just sort of happens automatically. You've got to work at it. It's really a ton of effort. You just have to work at it almost every day. In fact, I kind of keep a list of my to-call list, just of people I haven't pinged, I haven't talked to them in a while. And that's the way that you really build that network. So after 10 years at Apple, Apple has a program called the sabbatical program. So they give you 6 weeks off after 10 years, plus I had 6 weeks of vacation saved up. I had 3 months off to go goof around. And during that period of time, I met a couple engineers, as happens in Silicon Valley. But an interesting new idea for another networking communication product. And that company was called Packeteer. So the three of us decided to start the company. They started building prototypes, and I started looking at my screen trying to go, what does a CEO do? I've never been a CEO before, obviously, CEO of the company. I've never raised money before. I've never done any of the things necessary in order to run a startup. But the thing that really became apparent was learn from others. This is my other acronym. Because as I was starting to, I was literally so frustrated. I was like, we got to raise money. I don't even understand the concepts of how venture capital works or anything else. But what I did was, I just got on the phone. You've heard that from several people today. I saw a guy's name in the paper. His name was Howard Charney, and he had just sold his company to Cisco for a whole bunch of money. And I was just at the point where I didn't know what to do, so I just picked up the phone. I'd like to speak to Howard Charney. My name is Craig Elliott. I'm CEO of Packeteer. Could we get an appointment? Got it like that. And I literally told him, I said, I'm starting a company, I have no idea what I'm doing. I spent 2 hours with him. We went through all the different stuff. He introduced me to some venture capital guys and everything else. The power of the network, connecting with people who can help you, and learn from others, be able to extend your network, extend your knowledge and everything else. We did get some investors in. In fact, our angel investors included a guy named Steve Campbell. Steve Campbell founded Stratacom, sold it to Cisco for $4 billion. Another great guy. So now I could go add another contact. Steve, what do I do? Because he'd started other companies before. But that's the network, that's the way you learn. There are no, as much as I thought, if I had a Stanford MBA or something, I would be all set. When I talk to the guys at Stanford MBAs, this stuff isn't really taught anywhere. It's all different people and different networks that you build. So learn from others. That was the other thing. That's what we did with Packeteer in order to make those things happen. And I think the other thing, another Steve Jobs quote that I really believe is perseverance is 90% of any startup. Because invariably, all your planning, business planning, everything that you do, there's going to be so many hiccups, so many road bumps. There's a really good book, in fact, Ben Horowitz wrote it, who's Andreessen Horowitz, the big venture capitalist now in Silicon Valley. It's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And it really talks about how building companies is hard. People see all the headlines at the end of the IPO and woohoo, it's all great. It's hard. There's roadblocks. We had times at Packeteer where, much as some of the other people discuss, payroll is coming out of our pockets. We had a point in time once where we were raising a round of venture capital. We had a $5 million deal on the table, signed term sheet. Term sheets are typically when the deal's done and you're all ready to go. Naive Craig calls up the other VCs that we were negotiating with and says, oh no, that's okay, we don't need your money, we've already got a deal, we're good to go, thank you very much. Called them all up, hung up the phone. Next call was my venture capital guy going, you know what, we're not gonna do the deal anymore. We had a change in management, sorry. As I'm watching the bank balance do this. So one thing I did learn, wait till the money's in the bank. That's number one. But also perseverance. We knew we had a good product. We knew we had a good idea. We had great people on the team. But in that case, we're able to plow through, find a secondary venture capitalist, get the deal put together. But it's perseverance. It isn't. It's not the ability to predict the unpredictable or anything else. It's absolute perseverance. So we built these products, these high-speed specialized computers to do packet processing on the internet. And we sold a whole bunch of them, $500 million worth of them. And we took the company public, again, first time CEO, first time IPO. We went out on the road show. We did 77 meetings in 11 days, private jet, all over the place, Copenhagen, Stockholm, London, back across the United States. We had orders for 20 times more stock than we had to sell. So the price went up on the first day. We were at, I think the market cap on the first day was about 700 million. It rapidly went over $1 billion and then up to $2 billion, the market cap of the company. So it was a pretty heady time, learning a lot as we went all along the way. And the IPO, really taught us a lot as well, because then we had investors who were, publicly traded investors. My name was in the paper all the time. If I sold stock, my name was in the paper. If anything happened, it was a very, when they talk about being a public company, it's a very public event. Your financials are all put out in the public now. Everything is in the public. Your competition can see how much you spent on sales and marketing. It's a really interesting scenario. But it worked out well, we did well. I actually decided after running the company profitably for a few years to take some time off. And that's when we didn't just vacation in New Zealand, and we actually honeymooned in New Zealand. My wife and I, 20 years ago this year, we had our honeymoon on the South Island, but then we moved. We said we're gonna go to Wanaka for a while and stay down there. So we bought a house, moved to Wanaka, kids chucked their baseball gloves and started playing rugby. So it was a lot of fun. At the same time, I was also meeting and extending my business network to a lot of people within the New Zealand business community. I met a lot of people at New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. I met guys like Sam Morgan, the Trade Me entrepreneur, a number of folks, Rod Drury, and having some interactions. Because as a Silicon Valley guy, one thing I had was a lot of contacts. I really was very proactive about working my network and making sure I knew people and I could count on people. So we started having a lot of interesting conversations about what we could really do for New Zealand entrepreneurs and what we could do to really try to make the great ideas and the enthusiasm and inspiration, and you could just see the talent that was there, but expanding into larger markets outside of New Zealand was really a challenge. So also, One of my engineers at Packeteer screwed up my perfect retirement by calling me up and saying, Craig, I got an idea. So next time I was back in the States, one of the things I always do for all my employees as CEO, if they've ever worked for me in any one of my companies, is you've got a lifetime consulting agreement for any new idea you have. And so Scott Hankins took me up on this and said, I want to talk to you about an idea I've got. And so we sat down, and he showed me the idea. And I'm thinking about fly fishing and this. And I'm watching and watching, and I'm going, oh, the fly fishing is going right out the window. Because he had a phenomenal new idea to start another company, which we did 2.5 years ago, called Pertino, that basically takes all of that equipment, like that purple box you saw, that super high-speed specialized computer we built, as well as the ones from many other companies, Cisco, Juniper, other networking companies. We're putting all that in the cloud. No hardware, no configuration, and people pay on just a monthly basis. So our cloud-based network solution kind of takes a lot of what we did and makes it simple for anyone to connect anywhere in the world. In fact, when I left the office, let's see, got in this morning, so just 24 hours ago, basically, we had networks spun up by 5,000 companies in 70 countries around the world. The vast majority of those, nobody helped. People did it all themselves. So we got a new way to network. And when I look at these different opportunities, I get a lot of business plans, New Zealand ones, as well as US business opportunities passed by me. I always look for two things. One is it technically disruptive, because that really makes it interesting and something that you can do to get really solid engineers enthused about it. And the second piece is it economically disruptive? Is it something I can build a business out of? I'll give you a quick example on this one. We've got a local restaurant chain in Silicon Valley that have 27 restaurants. They have networked, connected point-of-sale devices, cash registers, plus all the management computers, servers, and everything. So the entire company right now has probably about $100,000 worth of network equipment to put that all together. We went in and put our product in. For a month, it cost me 7 cents to run that network using the Amazon cloud infrastructure instead of building our own product. So things are really going to be changing using the cloud. You start to hear about cloud-based technology. It's technically disruptive, which is interesting, but it's economically disruptive as well. So the next thing, as we're starting to work on this, though, it's complicated. Building networks in the cloud's never been done before. At Packeteer, those technologies hadn't been built before. We had 65 patents on the technology we built there. About half those engineers are working on Pertino now. But the one thing that we run into every day is my third and last, I promise, acronym, FIO, which is my answer to my engineers, to my marketing guys, and everybody else almost on a daily basis, and to my children. Figure it out. Because that's the only answer there is when you're doing new and inventive technology and you're working in a startup. There's no other choice. Figure it out. This is back, I made a little comment about my farm analogies, which most people don't appreciate. But I've said this to my staff before. I said, when they were stuck, we can't figure this out, this problem that we have. I said, you know what, when I was growing up in Iowa, it was 30 below, and the tractor wouldn't start, that didn't mean I didn't feed the cows, because the cows got fed, period. It was buckets, it was whatever it took, but you always feed the cows. So occasionally my vice presidents will see little Post-it notes that say feed the cows on their, I'm glad you laughed, they So anyway, this business, which we're really excited about, we can connect everybody around the world, as I said, connect everybody with everything. The other thing too is interesting as well, 10 years ago when we were building networks, the networks were built for people to sit in their offices at their desk from 8 to 5, right? And they go home and everything was fine. Now we got all these gizmos, right? Everybody's mobile all the time. We don't even have any desktop computers in our business. It's all laptops, iPads, Androids, everything else. And everybody's mobile. So they want to be able to work from Starbucks and home and Auckland and whatever else. So that's the other reason we really changed up the way networks are done, because why would you have this box, this rack of boxes and gear to build your network for your company when half your resources are in the cloud and people are all over the world? So anyway, very interesting stuff, a lot of fun. The other project we work on while we were doing Pertino, though, is I met with Sam Morgan. We were down in Wanaka, and we were talking about Kiwi entrepreneurs. And we see all this great technology, but how do we get them to expand into other markets? And I met with a bunch through my workings with trade enterprise, NZTE, with a lot of Kiwi entrepreneurs, and you could see is they'd have a pretty successful business. They're really making a lot of progress here. They want to expand into a larger market. They come to San Francisco, typically is a good place to start. And just, between, renting office space and trying to find a lawyer and figuring out payroll, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare for me, and I've lived there, my whole life. So what we really figured out, Sam and I said, is if we all pitch some money in, we got a few other guys, several other guys to all throw some money in together, we could start not really an incubator, but a landing pad, where Kiwi entrepreneurs who are already pretty successful in their business could pop in, they could start, we have some desk space, telephones and internet access, and be able to go and really try to explore for a 3, 6, or a 9 month time frame on their ability to expand into the United States. So we kicked that program off, and I think it's been running really successfully. The other one that we did, which is really interesting, I'm pretty excited about, is we did, we call it the Wintern program, the Winter Intern program. So in the United States, it's very popular. In fact, our companies have always had summer interns. Right? So in the Northern Hemisphere for June, July, and August, we would get the college kids who were on break. And they'd come and work for us. We'd get all sorts of great experience for them. It'd give us an opportunity to outsource some of the simpler jobs, you might say, out from the engineers to give them more time. It worked great. And one day, I heard our VP of engineering complaining that I'm so mad we only get them for 3 months. And I thought, I know where there's another summer. And so we started calling up ICT and some of the universities and trying to use our networks of people I know. We called Rod and Sam and everybody that I knew in New Zealand, and started to figure out, we specifically got some professors at University of Auckland and Victoria down in Wellington to give us, and to put up posters all over the computer science department. Come to Silicon Valley for 3 months. And see, so we got 40 resumes the first year. We only had spots for 3 people, brought them on board, and we had 3 interns from computer science interns that came over and worked in a Silicon Valley startup for 3 months. While they were there, I took them for lunch at Apple, we took them to the Google Hangouts for technology stuff. And the goal was, I sat down and when I took them to dinner, when they first got there, it said, you're gonna work really hard for us and do a lot of cool projects, but what we're gonna do for you is get you connections into Silicon Valley. And at the end of this 3 months, I'm going to talk to you about who you met, who you know, and who you can maintain contacts with. Because I'm convinced that if we can build those people networks back and forth between the businesses of Silicon Valley and the talent that's here in New Zealand, it's going to be phenomenal. So we're going to do more of that. In fact, we've got Apple, Cisco, and Netflix already have signed up, if we can get enough people to do that next year. The other thing is, a couple of people have mentioned Xero. I joined the board of Xero about 2 years ago, and was asked, I get a chance to be on a lot of different boards in Silicon Valley. In fact, our venture capital guys are funding Pertino. They've asked me to be on some boards. I've always turned them down. I said I'm too busy. But then I took this job. And so they're always saying, now, why would you take a position on a New Zealand company? And I said, I didn't take a position on a New Zealand company. I took a position on a world-class software company that happens to be in New Zealand. And as proven by the Forbes magazine article that we just saw, this wasn't best company in New Zealand, best company in Asia, or anything else. Most innovative company on the planet. Very, very impressive, and really making a name for itself. I think using companies like Xero to really make a name for all of New Zealand technology is really what's happening now. People are paying attention. So networking communications. We build all sorts of really crazy high-speed, nanosecond, packet processing devices and everything else. And that's been my business for 30 years in Silicon Valley. But the real value proposition is around people, and networking communications, and networking of people together, and that communications that happens. That's the way we find investors, that's the way we find employees, everything else. And we really hope we'll be able to do a good job in bringing New Zealand really tightly into the fold within Silicon Valley. I got one more story. I have time? Maybe, well. I got one more story to tell you, just as the power of networking, and I tried to tell this to all the college students I talked to. So I was having lunch in a restaurant in Silicon Valley, just had lunch, and I walked by and I saw this kid with a Swarthmore baseball hat. Now Swarthmore is a tiny little college in Pennsylvania on the east coast of the United States. But I happened to know another guy who played Swarthmore baseball 20 years ago. So I just said to him, I said, hey, Swarthmore Baseball, you know, I know a guy that played there. In this little random conversation. This kid stood up, said, hi, my name is Greg Cox. Good to meet you. Well, that's pretty good. Turned around and he said, you know, what do you do? I said, well, I'm CEO of a company here. He goes, I'm a computer science major. Can I get you my resume? Just like that. He's making 100 grand right now. Networking and communication. Take every possible chance you have to expand the people you know and take advantage of those opportunities. Thank you.